Hi, everybody. Welcome to the HOPECAST. This is David Dwight. I'm one of the ministry team at Hope Church in Richmond, Virginia, and I am joined today by Charis Napier, who is our main worship leader at Hope Church. You should know that our sound engineer is Charis Keeley, so I am here in the studio sandwiched between two Charises, and we're going to be talking about prayer today. So, Charis Napier, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
How you doing?
Great. I'm excited to get into it.
So let's consider a couple thoughts about prayer. I think it's a really big topic, right? Lots of people have lots of questions about prayer. Most people pray one way or another. But I want to start by seeing if there are any similarities or overlap with prayer and worship.
Mm-hmm.
You are our lead worship person at Hope. You lead other staff and volunteers who help us worship as a church in our services and different experiences. You're a thoughtful person. I know you think about worship and what it means and why we do it and what you're hoping people will experience. Do you see, and if so, how would you describe it, any overlay between worship and prayer?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that I've often even described our worship time, especially as a corporate congregation, as essentially prayers that we put to a melody and sing along with. They can be prayers, if you will, of praise. They can be prayers of confession. But really, we're just using our voices to proclaim who God is, who He is to us, what He's done, and sometimes to sort of yield our will and our life to Him.
Yeah.
And it's just set to music, if you will. So
Yeah.
I very much feel that worship in that context is basically prayer, and I see it that way.
So what we're beginning to do is give the concept of prayer a little bit wider range, a little more elasticity. I think I would say that when we have a worship service, it's all worship. Whether somebody is up front and they are praying and leading everybody in praying, whether you're leading people in singing, that's expressions of worship. The praying is expressions of worship. And hopefully a sermon and the teaching that's coming from up front is expressions in worship. And maybe the way we say it, and I think you just hinted at it, is we have intentionally gathered together to open ourselves to and yield ourselves to giving our attention to God. So we would say all those components of a worship service are worship. And we probably in our minds tend to break it into different parts, right? We'll sort of like, when you say worship, I think for most people, they think singing worship songs.
Yeah.
But there is singing worship songs, there's praying, and there is preaching, sermons, teaching scripture, and so on. But we're going to bundle it all into bringing ourselves with an intentional desire to honor and yield ourselves to God and to give our devotion to Him. And we're going to do that in a gathering of lots and lots of people, right? So prayer, when we use this word more specifically and when the Bible speaks about it, my guess is if I said prayer, people think conversational spoken words. They probably don't think singing.
Right.
But even that gets really interesting to me because by the time this podcast is over, I'm going to see if we can help people consider singing their prayers. The church has long history of this, right? It's everything from chants to meter to you name it. My guess is most people raised in the sort of Protestant background that we might be talking about might be thinking that that's so foreign to me. I've never experienced anything like that. Well, maybe we can move in that direction a little bit as we go along. What would you say is the goal of worship? What are we trying to do?
I guess the biggest phrase that's coming to me is just like alignment.
Okay.
Worship, prayer. I'm trying to align myself with God and his will and who he is and his ways. It's communication. But certainly for me, I feel alignment.
Okay. So probably the biggest metaphor throughout the Old and New Testaments that Scripture gives us as an example of our relationship with God is the marriage metaphor, right? Throughout the Old Testament, God says to Israel, though I was a husband to you. So God describes himself as the husband. In the New Testament, Jesus' relationship with believers is given to us as Jesus is the groom and believers are the bride. Okay, now, so what we have here is a very thoroughly permeating the scriptures example of marriage as what this relationship with God is all about. Okay, so with that, when you speak about worship and the goal being alignment, that makes me think about a marriage relationship. And good marriages have both people seeking alignment, right? Our conversations, our communications, we are regularly seeking alignment. To use a word that Elizabeth, my wife, and I use a lot, particularly when we're teaching this marriage weekend, we use the word oneness. That oneness is always the goal. Alignment is getting at this idea of oneness, that we're looking to be in the same place together, right? So what would you say in terms of your husband is Zach, you've been married 7 years. Let's just talk about this for a minute. What kinds of forms of communication do you have in your married life, like different categories or different ways that you communicate?
There are, I think you mentioned this, sort of the getting down to business, like this is what I'm making for dinner. This is the, did you do this? Can you do this type of conversation? There's also just a sort of acknowledging of one another. Good morning. Good to see you. I like you. I like to be around you. There's words of lost here.
So there's
pursuing.
There's different lanes.
Language. Yeah.
Say more about pursuing. That's a really fascinating word to me.
Even like, let's set aside this time on Sunday night, and we'll, eat dinner together and we'll just talk. We'll check in. We'll pursue one another's hearts. How can I be there for you this week? How can I support you? What do you need from me? Like, yeah.
So you're talking about like different lanes, I suppose, of communication. So marriages have these different lanes, right? I think you said there's sort of like the business side or the transactional side. There's stuff we got to do, and we need to be in touch to know how that's getting done. Did you pay this bill? Could you stop and pick up something at the grocery store? There's the ordinary business of it. I really like your word pursuing, which I think means we're in a posture of humility and we're asking things of the other person, not because we're asking to get something. We're asking questions because we're hoping to pursue their heart, right? So this is a different kind of asking than, will you buy me this for my birthday kind of thing. This is asking, like, the simple one would be something like, how was your day today? And we ask that to be able to connect on a little bit deeper level. This is not so much the transactional business side of things. Maybe the next level is getting into the heart place. How did that make you feel? Was that hard for you? And all of this is kind of pursuing a unity, a oneness, an alignment, a mutual understanding, a connection, right? And then you have other times that are tender, which are, I love you. I'm so grateful for you. It's conversation that is maybe the most heartfelt, the most intimate. Okay, so we just discussed in a marriage, you have these different types of levels and lanes by which we communicate. And the Bible gives us an understanding that our relationship with God is like a marriage. So that might suggest that our praying might have similar lanes like this. How does that land for you?
I couldn't agree more. Even when I think about a relationship, a marriage, and there's even like tension points. So obviously when it comes to the Lord, he's perfect. So he's not maybe as much feeling that from us, but we wrestle with things. God, I don't understand this. Why is this happening? Why did you let that happen? What are you doing to me? Type of language. Even that in a marriage, there can be tension that you have to work through if you are pursuing that unity and that oneness, alignment. So even that is found in prayer, which you find that a lot in the Psalms. You're going to find a lot of tension points as well.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. Definitely true. What if we, just for the sake of the conversation, I'm not trying to make this like a major teaching moment, just a way to kind of prod our conversation. What if we said prayer is the way we pursue relationship? Does that work for you? Anything missing?
No.
How would a marriage be if, well, let me try to come at this a little bit different way. I think for many, many, many people, their sense of prayer is that I come to God with requests and I ask God to respond to those requests, that's what prayer is. Okay, I think you and I could agree that is one lane. It's reasonable. The Bible gives us verses that speak to this. But if that is the entirety of what we understand praying to be, there's some really big things missing. So just to be a little more playful with it, let's say you said to Zach, hey, let's schedule a nice dinner out next week. And he's like, that sounds great. And he said, anything on your mind? And you said, yeah, I'd like to be able to ask you for a bunch of stuff. Like what? Like what? Just how would that roll out?
I'd be like, no, I'm not a genie.
Right. Like that's why you want to have a nice dinner out, because you want to ask me for a bunch of stuff, right? We're intentionally playing up the metaphor to try to maybe expose some ways that we have misunderstood prayer. The biblical analogy of our relationship is marriage. If in our marriage, the entirety of our communication was, I just want to ask you for stuff. And sometimes we would say, this marriage is not working. Why? Because I keep asking you for stuff and you don't keep giving it to me the way I want it. Right? Just saying it, it's like we can feel the problems in line, but flesh the problems out a bit. Like why is that so problematic?
Well, it's so one-dimensional too, because if I, the, let's say, question asker in this marriage, the only communication I'm really giving them is what I want. And then I'm saying, well, you're not giving me what I want, so this isn't working, but I'm going to keep asking you stuff. I'm never actually interested at all in knowing what they want. I'm never actually interested in them at all.
Right.
Even like if I think about my husband, if all I'm ever doing is asking things out of him and I'm never getting to know him, if I would just get to know his heart and his desires, that might even change what I would be asking for anyway.
Ooh, say more about that.
His desires might shift the way that I want to, the things that I want out of life. What if I'm, let's say a more materialistic person, just hypothetically speaking. So I'm always asking, can you make more money so we can get this? And, right? These are my requests. And maybe what he's looking for is his desires are emotional connectedness.
Yes.
The more I can actually get to know him and his desires, I might not care so much about getting the new thing. I might actually change my wants because I know him and I know what he desires, and we're aligning those things more.
So if I'm hearing that, what I would say is he is what you are pursuing, not what he can give you. So if you're like a super materialistic person and your sense of your husband was his place and purpose in your life is to enable you to get your material wants, then the quality of this relationship is going to really struggle. So in that analogy, the desire of your heart is your material wants, and your husband is an accomplice, as you see it, for you to get what you want. When the point of marriage is that what we want is one another, what we want is closeness and unity and oneness with one another.
Yep.
So this contorts the idea so drastically. Okay, so let's go back to the dinner date idea. Would love to schedule a nice dinner together, right? So he's thinking, oh, great. And then he's like, what do you have on your mind? You say, well, I want to ask you for a bunch of stuff, right? You can feel like his anticipation in the beginning would be, that sounds great because we're going to have a really nice evening to connect together. But then, the trap door opens and you say, well, no, I just wanted to ask you for a bunch of stuff. In fact, I'm going to try to manipulate the environment to get you in a place where you would be even more responsive to what I want to ask you for. So it's not a dinner date, it's a setup. And I just am walking around the landscape here with, to what degree do we do that with our praying? So to what degree do we sort of say to God, I want to have this meaningful prayer life with you, but in fact what we did was we said, I want to have a dinner date with you because I got a bunch of stuff I want to ask you for. Okay, now there are times and places where spouses ask each other for things. We're working out life and we do that. But if the entirety of a relationship is asking each other for things, it's probably not going to work in the long run. It's going to fall apart on its own emptiness. And so what I love about where we are so far is I think we're trying to establish that the point of a marriage is growing toward alignment and oneness, which means knowing each other more and more and more deeply, which means giving more of ourselves to each other. And as we do that, it's being held in a kind of sacred trust. So if you're giving more and more of yourself to Zach and he's holding what you're giving him in a sacred trust, and that's for the two of you to share, and he's giving more and more of himself to you, and you're holding that in a sacred trust, the richness that you have between the two of you and the bond that you have between the two of you is this incredibly beautiful, growing, heartfelt connection. And it's not to be shared with everybody else. There's stuff that is shared between you as husband and wife that is only for the two of you. So now we're talking about a kind of relationship that has this beauty of the growth, the oneness, the knowing each other. Because ultimately, I think what we're saying is my desire is to know and love you. And if each of us says, that's what I am doing here, this is my desire to know and love you, we have a really, really great foundation. But if my desire is to get from you what I can get from you, this relationship is going to struggle at best.
Yep.
And I think for many people, and this is not a value judgment, I don't blame people. There are a million reasons we get to this place. I think for many people, what they've been taught or taught to expect, or the example that's been given to them is prayer is how you ask God for a bunch of stuff. And if we use this marriage analogy, then the relationship isn't going to go very far, and it's going to be a real struggle. And maybe we can be diagnosing some things where people are like, yeah, because my whole Christian life is just a real struggle. Is it possible, I'm not saying this is the only reason, but is it possible that part of it is there's this unspoken dynamic, which is I thought anytime I talk with you, God, it's about asking you for a bunch of stuff. As compared to we want to spend time together for alignment and oneness. And when you get into the marriage of the deeper places of I love you, I'm so grateful for you, we're actually getting into deep expressions of gratitude and love. So what if our prayer lives looked like that? I have a feeling if we could grow in this direction, take a person today who is, let's say, hearing this podcast and maybe is intrigued by it, maybe likes the sound of it, maybe realizes, gee, I do think most of my prayer life has been, saying to God, I'd like to meet with you because I have a lot to ask you for. But we're trying to help somebody maybe recalibrate their sense of what this is all about. I wonder if 10 years down the road, because this kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
If 10 years down the road, we said, how has your prayer life changed in 10 years? I wonder if they might say, 10 years ago, my prayer life was mostly me asking God for a bunch of stuff. Now, I do occasionally ask him for stuff, but asking him for stuff is not really very much of my prayer life at all. What do you think about that?
Yeah. It leads me to even think about the Lord's Prayer. It also just, this whole concept of prayer and how we engage with it. I mean, I think it would be great for us to look to Jesus, who would pray to his Father. So what did that content look like? I don't think it was Jesus asking God for all these miracles. I think it was him having that intimacy with his Father. So that would be something to look into. But even so, I'm going to back up and share a little personal side. A few years ago, my family and, me and my husband, but also my larger family, went through a lot of loss and experienced multiple deaths and hardships within our family. In that season, my prayers looked a lot like requests. Please, heal this person. Please do this. It was like the desperation. And I think those prayers were right in that time.
Yeah.
Because everything has that season. But as we've walked through a few years of the aftermath of suffering, my prayers in this are a lot less about requests like, please now give me this or this. And they've moved into, um, keep showing me your beauty in this pain. Keep showing up because I'm seeing it and I want to know you in this space instead of wishing these things away. I actually want to see you up close. And when you're drawing near to my broken heart, I want to see it. So, personally, in different seasons of my life, my prayers have shifted. Much like what you said, they would in a relationship, depending on the stage of life you're even at, pre kids, during young childhood. I mean, the interactions that you have with your spouse are going to look a little different.
Yeah.
Um, but I would hope that if you're walking with the Lord, that over a 10-year span, that you would see changes in your prayer, because that means you're growing with Him.
Well, you just said so much that is so meaningful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm concerned that somebody might say, so David, you're saying that your prayer life shouldn't ever have asking in it? I'm not saying that. There are plenty of scriptures where we are instructed to ask. But I am saying in a relationship that has growing intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's much more to it than asking things of each other. And generally speaking, asking things of each other, while necessary, feels less spiritually deep, nourishing, meaningful, joyful than deeper prayer times where we are spending time with God in a deep desire for intimacy with Him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to stretch this a little bit further. There are a lot of traditions in the church, capital C, big church, throughout history that give us different examples of different ways to pray. So some of the deepest examples of this come out of various orders in the Catholic tradition. I think for most of us in the Protestant world and the evangelical Protestant world, our praying, most of what we've sort of been taught has been, this is about asking for things. Probably for many of us in the evangelical Protestant world, we sort of think of a prayer list.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things I'm praying about. These are the people I'm praying for. Once again, I'm anxious that somebody's going to say, so you're telling me I shouldn't do that? No, I'm not saying I shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. What we're saying is that there are also other lanes of deep invitation
Mm-hmm.
to where our praying invites us into intimacy in God's presence. And a lot of that could be praying, which is worshiping. I'm not asking for anything, I'm worshiping.
Mm-hmm.
Praying, which is scriptural words and ideas coming from me back to God. I may be asking for some things, but sometimes what I'm asking for is not so much the list. It would be more a little bit like what you said. What I'm asking for, God, is deeper intimacy with you. What I'm asking for is such an alignment with you that I have a deeper peace.
Mm-hmm.
So we could present to God a lot of things that we're anxious and worried about and say, can you solve this, 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 and this? And there's a place for that.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are growing into a prayer life with God where we are just saying, God, I just want such union with you. I want to grow with you to a place of depth.
Mm.
The things that have made us anxious, we might find that they simply aren't there as much
Yeah.
as they used to be. Because the orientation of where my spiritual life, my spirit is given, is into this place of deepening desire to be with God, so that our praying might be more and more characterized by, really, I'm not sure I really did ask God for anything today.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might be like, I don't know what it means to pray if you're not asking for things. And I say that with sympathy, again, back to we've been introduced to prayer in a lot of different ways. So to take this a little deeper, I'm going to share this. It feels quite vulnerable to me. I feel like a number of years ago, God just was gracefully sort of inviting me into a deeper prayer life. So somebody might say, well, what do you do about that? All I did was I'm like saying, okay, God, what does that mean? It's a little bit of irony, right? He's inviting me into a deeper prayer life, and I start praying about what a deeper prayer life means or looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so this part feels vulnerable to me, but I will say this has made a really big difference for me. Years ago, I was reading Eugene Peterson's biography by Win Collier. I think it's called Fire in My Bones. And Win Collier describes a time where Eugene Peterson, if people don't know, Eugene Peterson was a pastor for years, and then he was most known for being an author, and he did the translation of the Message version of the Bible. Well, he had an office in his home. And effectively, over the years, his kids had been told to knock on the door if it was closed. Like, don't just walk in on dad. He might be working on a sermon or something. So knock on the door. Okay, very well. Well, one afternoon, his son, Eric, tells a story about how he was probably, I don't know, like a late teenager at the time. And for whatever reason, he was certain his dad had gone out of the house, like he had gone to do errands or he wasn't home.
Mm-hmm.
So Eric goes to put something in his father's office. The door is closed, but Eric didn't knock because he thought his father was not in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric opened the door, and in front of him was his father, Eugene, on his knees on the floor with a prayer shawl over his head and shoulders, a candle, and an open Bible. And Eric tells the story. He was so embarrassed, like he felt that he had like walked in on somebody in an exceptionally private moment. And anyway, there was sort of a flutter of apology and it's okay and all that sort of thing. But his point was, he started reflecting on that and he thought, how many hours had my father done that in that office and I never knew that's what he was doing in there? I have no idea. What he got was this like little sampler moment.
Mm-hmm.
He happened to open the door and there's his father praying like this. So I read this, and a few years ago, I bought a prayer shawl, which again, I'm feeling a little exposed here because I think for a lot of like evangelical Protestants, they're going to be like, ooh, that sounds really weird. Do you have to have a prayer shawl? No. Does it make your prayers matter more? No. Does it mean they're going to get answered better? No. Then what's the point? To me, a prayer shawl has a way of expressing to the Lord, I want this to be a set apart time where I am seeking to enter your presence and seek an alignment of oneness in my praying. The other thing I would say is when you put a prayer shawl over your head and shoulders, you feel like you're surrounded. You feel like you're in. And it helps the sense that when I'm praying, I'm not just saying words, I have entered a place of the Lord's presence. And a verse that I have near a spot where I pray is, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And a prayer shawl feels like that shelter, that place you enter. So what I would say is, again, I'm a little nervous about it, but I'll just let it be what it is. This has been very, very meaningful to me right? Now, one reason I hesitate to talk about it is because some of Jesus' injunctions in the Gospels, when you go into your inner room, don't make a show of it. So I want to avoid anybody. Oh, look, he's making a show of his prayer life. But it's an invitation for us to consider that prayer has many dimensions of depth in addition to asking.
Mm-hmm.
What are your mm-hms about?
Something that we say a lot in our home, or just topic of conversation, is creating the opportunity for, or setting the table for. And it's sort of like exactly what you're saying with the Shaw. It's not a requirement, but by intentionally placing something over you, you're not just going to place it over you and then just go make a sandwich and watch TV. You could, but I don't know. You are creating, by doing this, creating a rhythm. So therefore, you've set the table that, okay, now I can make a choice. I'm either going to do this, or I'm just going to take this off and move on with my day.
Yeah.
I would say if you're having a really hard time with your prayer life, create an opportunity every day that makes it's almost like systematizing it into your life, where whether it's as soon as you wake up, I did that for a while, where the first thing I did when I would get out of bed is I would kneel and I would say, "Good morning, Lord. Thank you so much for this day. May it be yours." All just the simple fact of getting up and the first thing I do is just kneel, I create an opportunity. Whereas,
Well, can I stop you there for a minute? The fact that you say you kneel, right? You could immediately go into the bathroom, brush your teeth.
Sure.
And you could say those words while you were brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
But something quite different is being expressed when what you're saying is you get out of bed, you kneel, and you say these words.
It's kind of going back to the idea of alignment. So I think this can be challenging for us in our American culture. We're a little more individuality, a little more don't tell me what to do if I will.
Right.
We don't have as much of a honoring culture. But I think there is something to aligning sometimes your physical posture, much like putting on a prayer shawl. It does not mean that you can't meet with God without those things.
Right.
I think it's just, if you're finding it difficult, there's ways to sort of remove obstacles that you're bumping into when you're like, I don't understand how to have a prayer life, by simply doing something physical that sets you apart from the rest of the rhythm of your day, can help create opportunity for you to meet with God.
Do you think that if you have a growing prayer life, your times of praying will always get longer and longer?
I hope that's not a trick question.
It's an honest question.
Yeah. I think it can very much depend on the season of life that you're in.
I so appreciate that.
Yeah. I would say before I had a young child, my prayer life times were much more extended. And I don't think that's a reflection upon if I'm growing in him. I just think the capacity of my days are limited.
It's so good that you're saying that. And there's so many people with young kids that are thanking you right now.
Yeah.
I remember when our kids were little, here was my theory was I could almost never find time to pray and be with God apart from the kids wanting to be around. So my theory was I'm going to get up earlier and earlier and earlier, right? This is the way I'm going to do this. Here's the thing. Kids aren't wired the same way, particularly really little kids.
Yeah.
They don't care what time it is. And my kids would always hear me because I would want to go downstairs to a place I would pray. Wouldn't matter how quiet I tried to be. My kids would hear me. And about 6 minutes in, I'd hear a little pitter patter of feet. I can remember at first being frustrated by this because I'm thinking, I'm trying to. And then I just can remember a season where I thought, David, do you think God doesn't understand little children? Do you think God doesn't understand that you're a father? Do you think God doesn't understand that he made these children? Do you think God doesn't understand that he gave these children in your life? Do you think God doesn't understand that these children are part of your life with him?
Yep.
Why are you trying to separate this stuff out? So I remember one day somebody said, I was sharing this with somebody older and wiser, and he said, well, why don't you invite your child to just sit next to you on the couch or sit on your lap or lie next to you on the couch, put their head on your lap, and just tell them that you're praying and reading the Bible, and they can just be there and see and feel what's happening. It was so helpful to me. And why did I feel like this has to be this is just for me time? Like, why did I feel like the children like weren't supposed to have any integration in that time?
Yep.
So thank you for saying what you just said. It's a really, really good reminder. And particularly saying, well, I think of two things. One, you said, I don't have as lengthy prayer times because I've got a little kid. And secondly, it doesn't mean that you're not growing. I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think there may very well be times when you find that you're learning intimacy praying and you almost find that you lost track of time. And you kind of aren't even thinking, how long have I been praying? Has it been 3 minutes or 9 minutes or 26 minutes? You do almost exit your present surroundings. And you kind of enter this time. But there's also plenty of times where there's 30-second prayers or 15-second prayers. I've got plenty of that. One of the things I'd love to maybe conclude with as we're wrapping up is I don't know where I heard this, if I heard it from somewhere else or if it just rattled around my own head. But the sense of it was, don't wait to go to heaven to go to heaven. Okay, what? Like, you can have moments of meaningful, deep prayer that are virtually like visiting heaven. And so when your physical body dies and you go to heaven the way we most traditionally would speak of it, doesn't have to be the first time you go to heaven or doesn't have to be the first time you experience heaven, right? And this connects back into almost full circle where we started with worship.
Yep.
You know, you hear sometimes people will say, I had such an incredibly beautiful worship experience. I felt like I was in heaven. You know, people say something like that. That's kind of what we're saying.
Yep.
Go to heaven before you go to heaven. Like pursue times of prayer and opportunity that are worship and intimacy with God and seeking his beauty. Now, it's not going to be the full experience, but it will be a snippet, a foretaste, so that now I'm really grasping. But when you actually go to heaven, you'd be like, oh, I had a sense what this was like.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean. And there's almost even, it's a little risky saying this maybe, but there's almost even a sense of what a pleasure it is to be here on earth with all its brokenness before the fullness of heaven, because the way that we get to commune with God in our suffering, there's just a depth that even the angels don't understand, because they don't suffer and they don't have to therefore align themselves against their own flesh and desire and will. They don't have to, metaphorically speaking, lay down their life and die to their flesh to offer up the Lord this living sacrifice of praise. And it's hard and it's really challenging, but sometimes in the darker times of my life, I think, man, on earth, this is the only time that we get to offer these kinds of prayers up. This is the only time I'm ever going to be able to have this kind of moment with God. And maybe we can consider it, as Jesus would say, blessed.
I think that is so profound. You saying, as Jesus would say, blessed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that makes me think of the Beatitudes. Blessed are
Yep.
the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Said in a really simple way, and I don't remember where I first heard this, but it dovetails very substantially with what you're saying. Enter into the benefits and the beauty of your suffering without wasting an ounce, because once you die, you've lost the chance.
Yeah.
Meaning suffering's gone.
Yep.
So there won't be the opportunity to
Mm.
enter and experience the pain, the hardship, the brokenness of sin.
Yeah.
It'll be only glory.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, wouldn't we both say, well, isn't that what we all want? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
But God is a sovereign God with good intentions. So there are remarkable invitations, and you've articulated it so well. When life is really hard, once we die and fully go to heaven, that opportunity is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that flips the
Yep.
script so substantially.
Yep.
Closing comment, thought?
I just would really encourage anybody who, like we've mentioned, who maybe just don't even quite know how to even start praying. Find a time to set the table for it. And maybe instead of, at the beginning bringing all your requests, maybe just start with thankfulness. And do that for a while. Maybe take a break from your requests and see how that starts to shape your prayers a little bit.
When I was a new Christian, I was introduced to lots of little acronyms that were sort of ways to follow patterns of prayer. And those can be helpful for sure. They, in their own way, can also become a distraction because you're like, am I doing it right? Am I following the pattern right? How about this? I'm intrigued if we close by reading a number of verses that are all about prayer. And I don't think we've ever done this before. You have the verses in front of you, and so do I. Let's alternate reading them.
Great.
Okay. And we'll just close the podcast by letting people hear these invitations that are related to prayer that come from the scriptures. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. And then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him.
1 Thessalonians 5:16-18. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus.
Mark 11:24. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours.
Ephesians 6:18. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people.
1 Chronicles 16, 8 through 11. Give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done. Sing to him, sing praise to him, tell of all his wonderful acts, glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and his strength, seek his face always.
Psalm 34:17. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles.
Psalm 145:18. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth.
Jeremiah 29:12. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you.
Jeremiah 33:3. Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know.
Let's read this one together.
Okay.
Matthew 6:9 through 13.
This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Matthew 7, 7 through 8. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened.
Romans 12:12. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer.
Philippians 4, 6 and 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.
Hebrews 4:14 through 16. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need.
And the last one in our list is James chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Okay, everybody, I think we've covered a lot here today. Hopefully it was helpful to you. Charis, thanks for your great insights today. I think people will be really, really encouraged. I always love the idea that people hear from someone who is one of our worship leaders, because when you get to know her heart and her mind and her love for God, it just adds dimensions to know that this is the person who's leading you in worship. I think it's really, really significant. So thanks for joining us on the HOPECAST today, everybody. This is a ministry from Hope Church in Richmond, Virginia. And you can find more about Hope at hopechurchrva.com if you're interested. And if you like the podcast, share it with some folks. You can find it on all the normal podcast platforms.